Day 30th, and the next 29 days. In pre-dawn enchanting light, his gaze followed a transparent dewdrop gracefully rolling down to the base of the nipple, and after a momentary stop, down the rounded breast. The tiny droplet that melted before his eyes as it was absorbed into the skin, and inexorably decreased in size until it completely disappeared on the warm surface. His porcelain goddess was beautiful. The longing to possess her grew and almost reached its limit. With each passing day, desire, like an untamable beast restrained by chains, grew stronger, ready to free itself from the constricting shackles at any moment. She lay before him so inviting, so open. He knew she longed to take him into her fold. The memories of passionate kisses and the lavender field the night before were the proof. He inhaled the delicate sweetness of her body aroma, intensified overnight, over and over again, but still craving more of this alluring perfume. Like an insatiable and voluptuous nymphomaniac, even asleep, she was seducing him. She captivated him with the energy of a wild female, capturing prey in the net of her aroma. It drove him crazy. He had to resist, but he could no longer. He was ready at any moment to unleash a long-held stream of lust on her. The man glared at his woman, wanting her on the verge of pain and madness. Voluntarily committing himself to sweet torture, like a masochist, he did not want to look away. On the contrary, he forced himself to look and suffer. He was plunging into misery deeper and deeper. The agony was becoming more and more unbearable. He tormented himself but kept looking. The rising sun illuminated every part of her body, and this made her forms even more irresistible. Smooth belly turned into a battlefield where his defenses were broken and the army was completely defeated. The impeccable line of the abdomen gracefully turned into the sloping outline of the mound of the pubis, overgrown with fiery white vegetation, the cradle of sin, where he would drop his weapon, announce his surrender, and gladly accept imminent death. He was completely captured by the sight of the perfect body. The boiling sexual energy oozed through his skin and turned into a vortex, the tension in the air so strong it could not help but wake her up. Her eyes opened, and she turned in his direction. He met her welcoming gaze. With inviting, misty green eyes and wet parted lips, she woke up ready for love. Suddenly, she leaned towards him with her whole body and pressed herself, wrapping her legs around and stunning him with a powerful stream of feminine energy. Insidious, unpredictable, ruthless. His wild desires, like racing horses, galloped recklessly, demolishing everything in their path. He was no longer in control. Longing for each other for so long, like two wild animals, they entwined into a ball of sensuality and lust. Merged into one, they gasped from the long-awaited kisses and caresses, rolled on the soft carpet of turquoise moss in sweet oblivion. The pounding of hearts beating in unison filled the air. When lips were finally swollen from kisses, when their bodies were almost melting under a surge of emotions, he pressed her back against the turquoise featherbed, then kneeled over her like a hungry wolf over his prey before tearing it apart. They looked intently into each other's eyes. Love and the rising sun reflected in their excited, dilated pupils. He stroked her face and hair. He touched her graceful hands. The touch was enjoyable, giving him shiver, pushing him into sweet surrender. He slowly ran his hand down her neck and took her breast in his palm. Full and firm, they gently spread under their own weight. Nipples tensed and perked up, calling to him like beacons calling to a fishing boat lost in the foggy sea. How many times he has dreamed of tasting them. They were succulent and sweet. For a long time he could not tear himself away from them, caressing nipples with a rough tongue, forcing her to moan and arching on the turquoise moss. He covered her skin with kisses, inhaling its scent. Time stopped. Minutes passed, or perhaps centuries. Time lost all meaning in that moment of pleasure. She lay on her back. He gently lifted her legs and put them on his shoulders. He stroked them from top to bottom, going down to the hot thighs. He kissed her feet, first one, then the other, then the toes, penetrating between them with the hot tongue, which made her wriggle from the sweet tormenting caresses, the peak of bliss. He didn't want this to ever end. He wanted to stay with her forever. They looked into each other's eyes, and there was love. The same love that kills mercilessly, in unbearable torment. Love to which a person voluntarily surrenders, even well aware of the consequences. A love to die for, dangerous and short-lived. The one confused with passion. It will lift you in a whirlwind of sweet feelings to carry to the stars. It will let you taste absolute happiness for just a moment and then let you fall down while ripping the heart to shreds. Passion or love, it's so ephemeral. Everyone dreams of experiencing it at least once in their life, but it is so intense that not everyone can survive it. It passes and leaves an indelible mark for the rest of your life. But for them, there was only this moment, the moment of passion, love, and pure delight. He saw how wet she became. Hot juice oozed from her depth to glitter in the light of the rising sun. He wanted to taste it and drink it to the bottom. Unable to resist, he sank down, parted the soft folds with his fingers, and pressed his lips to her. He pushed his tongue deep inside and drank her juice. He felt unbearably hot. His masculinity was about to explode. He could no longer restrain his desires. He tore his mouth from her wet captivity. She, groaning with anticipation, spread her legs, urging him to take possession of her. He obeyed and entered her with force. She let his hardened flesh into her wet domain. Nothing else existed. No past, no future. The groans of one echoed the cries of bliss of the other. He thrust his steel sword, his resilient flesh into her. She wriggled under him. He held her full breasts in strong palms and wouldn't let go. He squeezed them, stroked them, then kissed them, digging his lips into her flesh. He was entering her deeper and deeper with more resolve and more force. He moved with all his irrepressible strength, a rider who tried to rein in an unbroken horse. Hot, sweaty, unstoppable, they gave themselves to each other as if there was no tomorrow. Her chest moved rapidly with each gasp. He held her tightly by the hips and pressed himself harder each time. The rhythm quickened. The moans became more and more piercing. All the feelings and emotions previously held back now exploded in fireworks. the energies of both souls intertwined, reached a climax to discharge with an electric jolt, stunning their bodies at the same time. Convulsing, she moaned loudly in his arms, experiencing a powerful magical orgasm. At the same moment, he screamed in a frenzy, shuddering. Their loud moans of release filled the island, soaring into the sky. Almost exhausted, he squeezed her weary body in a tight embrace. Suddenly, his own groan of pleasure turned into a cry of a wounded beast. In a split second, the hot female flesh in his hands exploded and crumbled to ashes. Billions of silver ash particles shot up into the sky, swirling in the air like a giant vortex. After a few seconds, the whirlwind dissipated, and they began descending to the surface of the island, a snowfall sparkling in the sun, abundantly showering the roots of a giant tree. Gluttonous, hungry proboscis joyfully came to life. They silently opened their insatiable widespread jaws and malevolently sucked ashes in. Like an ancient warrior stricken down by a spear in a gladiatorial fight, he dropped to his knees, raised his hands to the sky, and roared, pierced with pain. Destroyed and spent, he rolled down the soft, mossy hill. He gathered his last strength, forced himself back on his feet, and ran, away from his den and from the tree. His heavy stride disturbed silver ash particles, sent them flying from under his feet and lifting them into clouds of shiny dust behind him. Long after the man passed, an agitated vortex of ash was whirling in the air, dancing in the rays of the bright sun. As dazzling and magnificent as emeralds and diamonds in an intricate kaleidoscope. He continued to run, racing with the wind. He still tasted and smelled the juice of his beloved on his dry lips. That was all that was left of her. Pain and anguish tore at his chest. He raced towards the ocean, towards the high cliff. Not stopping at the edge, he jumped into the water in despair. Waves swept over him. He swam until the strength left him, and he was breathless. Then, turning over on his back, the man stretched out his arms, relaxed his body, and remained still on the surface of the water. Nothing but the scorching sun and rough waves surrounded him. Salt water kept his body on the surface and carried him, almost lifeless, on the waves until he was washed ashore. Completely spent, he lay there in oblivion on the water's edge. Eventually, with torn feelings, the man wandered aimlessly around the island, attempting to soothe the deep pain of loss. Desperately trying to find a distraction, he wore himself out by swimming to the brink of exhaustion, and then collapsed and fell asleep with a heavy, dreamless sleep. The agony of pain would not stop. For 3 weeks he roamed along the edge of the ocean in despair and loneliness, his gaze locked on the distant horizon. He did not want to return to the center of the island and face his executioner. The villain, as always, sat on his throne on a turquoise hill surrounded by silver ash. He never wanted to see the tree again or go back under its crown and sleep in his moss bed. But the tree, as a possessive owner, would not let him go. A subtle but painfully familiar aroma began filling the air. Flowers were blooming again, the man thought. Their scent could not be confused with anything else. As before, the tree beckoned to him, attracting him, compelling him. The sweet scent of flowers blooming on the tree shocked and weakened his mind. Every day this smell became more persistent and spread throughout the island, driving him crazy. He reached the furthest cave, the only place that temporarily saved him from the floral obsession, and where he could hide in the depth. The starry cave. The mouth of the cave swallowed him like a huge whale. He fell from fatigue and mental exhaustion onto a heap of soft grass thrown on a cold stone floor. Freed from the imposing smell and finally relieved, he perked up. He knew he would find shelter and comfort here, albeit for a short time. The grotto was his last refuge. Here the sky was always of stars. Dawn never came. Thousands of fireflies living in the cave emitted flickering light and illuminated the cave surface so intensely that it turned into a night sky full of myriads of stars. With no walls in sight, one could think the cave was endless. Mesmerized, he wanted to watch the incessant blinking of lights and dissolve in them. The spectacle fascinated and made him forget about everything in the world, but only until the ubiquitous smell of flowers blooming on the gigantic tree found its way into the cave. Eventually, the scent from the tree spread throughout the island and penetrated every nook and cranny. The smell finally filled his last refuge. It drove the man insane and took over his mind and body. There was nowhere else to hide. The sweet spirit enveloped, stifled, made him forget about recently experienced feelings and rekindled new ones in him. The scent beckoned for him to obey and return to the tree. The inevitable moment of having to leave the starry cave came. The man got up and headed for the exit. Before leaving the hideout, he stopped by the wall for a moment and picked up a sharp diamond stone from the cave's floor. The wall was covered with scratches marks on it, indicating the count. Many groups of 5 notches each. With the edge of the stone, the man added another notch, then put his stylus back in its original place and left the cave. He went out into the dawn. As if under spell, he continued this way to where his soul and body belonged. The imperious smell propelled him towards a place he knew well, and at the same time to a meeting with the unknown. The belief that the pain of loss would haunt him again never left him. As before, he knew that he would succumb to such agony of feelings that death itself would seem as a happy alternative. However, intoxicated by the scent, he was losing self-control all over. Climbing out of the abyss of oblivion, he realized that the thirst to learn the unknown was more powerful than any of his inner fears. Each time the island brutally killed him, and each time he was inexorably resurrected. After dragging him through all the torments of hell, it invariably brought him back to life. This time would be no different, he knew. The young man returned to the center of the island. It has been 4 weeks since he, heartbroken, left his bed in search of comfort. Everything here remained the same. Nothing changed. The silver island, as always, was covered with a shimmering silver veil. A light breeze drove the ash into the dunes around the greedy and insatiable proboscis. With each breath, particles of shiny ash flew into the air, and the next portion of food would fall right into the voracious mouths. The colorful lush gardens were in bloom and awaited those who would come and feast on a rich harvest. The ocean was refreshing and welcoming. The man lingered at the foot of the hill. He gently stroked its turquoise silk surface with his hands. He returned home. He began to climb to the base of the tree, along the massive protruding roots. He has done this before. The scent of flowers has almost reached its climax. The blossoms had fallen off last night, and now their scent completely engulfed his mind. He climbed further and further. The higher he climbed, the more aroma enveloped and intoxicated him. Here and there he saw blossoms on the ground. At the very base of the tree, turquoise moss was completely hidden under the carpet of fallen bright pink petals. And she was already there. She calmly stood under the tree, leaning her graceful back on its trunk, exposing a serene face to the sun's rays. Her skin, the color of dark chocolate, glowed in the sun, as if she was smothered in oil. She was tall and slender. For a moment, he imagined her as a panther, nonchalantly lazing in the sun. Dark, short, tight curls framed a perfect face with high cheekbones. Her breasts, small and firm, were striking in their perfect lines. The eyes, covered from the sun, stood out like two huge almonds on her thin face. There was something daring in her, from a young lioness, and at the same time tender, from a lion cub. Her wild beauty and mysteriousness instantly captivated him. The excitement was overwhelming. A surge of sudden happiness and euphoria swept over him. He loved her at first sight. He has never felt so happy before. The end.